All right, let's jump right in. We're going to travel way back in time, long before fiber optics and satellites, to explore the legendary network that really first connected the world. We're talking about the Silk Road, what was basically the world's first superhighway. I mean, think about it for a second. Before we had the internet, how did anything get anywhere? Not just goods, but big ideas, new technologies, entire cultures. How did they cross continents without instant communication? Well, the answer lies in the sprawling, ancient network that was, for all intents and purposes, the world's very first internet. So here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with its origins, why we even call it the first internet. Then we'll look at the goods that moved along it and the ideas that tagged along for the ride. We'll see why it eventually faded away, what its legacy is today, and this is the really cool part, how it's kind of being reborn. Okay, first up, the world's first internet. And look, calling it that isn't just some catchy headline. It really gets to the core of what the Silk Road was. It was this incredible bridge between civilizations, moving not just stuff, but information across absolutely massive distances. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions is that the Silk Road was, a single paved road from point A to point B. It was nothing like that. It was this massive, complex web of shifting caravan trails, desert tracks, and even sea lanes. It's better to think of it less like a highway and more like a giant branching river system connecting China all the way to the Mediterranean. And the sheer scale of this thing is, well, it's just mind-boggling. We're talking over 6,000 kilometers. That's almost 4,000 miles. It cut across some of the most brutal landscapes on Earth, scorching hot deserts, freezing mountain ranges, all to link up the great empires of the ancient world. It's just incredible. All right, so let's get into what really powered this whole thing: commerce. At its heart, the Silk Road was all about trade. It was a pipeline for luxury goods, for innovation, and for just immense wealth that literally built empires. So, when was all this happening? The first routes started to form way back during China's Han Dynasty around 200 BCE. But its golden age, the real peak, came much, much later. We're talking the 13th century, under the Mongol Empire. Why? Because they controlled a huge chunk of the route and made it way safer for merchants to travel. But all good things come to an end, right? By the 15th century, with the rise of sea travel, things started to wind down. And just look at the stuff that was being traded. It was the world's first truly global marketplace. Of course, you have silk from China, so valuable it gave the whole network its name. But China was also sending out paper, porcelain, gunpowder, all game-changing technologies. And coming the other way, the Roman Empire sent gold and wool, India sent spices and gems, Persia sent these incredible carpets and their scientific knowledge. It was this amazing melting pot of goods. All of this trade, naturally, led to the rise of these legendary cities, places you've probably heard of, like Samarkand, Kashgar, Constantinople. These weren't just dusty outposts. They became these huge, bustling, cosmopolitan centers. Seriously, think of them as the ancient world's New York or London, global hubs where merchants would rest, trade their goods, and maybe most importantly, swap stories and ideas. And that brings us to maybe the most important part of this whole story. Because the biggest impact of the Silk Road wasn't the silk or the spices or the gold. It was the invisible cargo that traveled with those caravans, the ideas, the beliefs, the technologies that will completely reshape the world. Yeah, this quote just nails it. The most valuable cargo wasn't silk or spices, it was knowledge. Think about it. Silk could make you rich for a lifetime, but the knowledge of how to make paper or a whole new system of belief, that could change a civilization forever. This is where the true legacy of the Silk Road lies. And you can see it so clearly with religion. Buddhism, for example, started in India, but it followed these trade routes right into Central Asia and China, where it took on a life of its own. At the same time, Islam is spreading from the Middle East, while Christianity and even Zoroastrianism were moving east. The Silk Road literally redrew the spiritual map of the entire continent. And it was the same story with technology. This was a two-way street. You had these world-changing inventions like paper, printing, and gunpowder flowing out of China and heading west. But coming back the other way were equally massive breakthroughs: mathematics from India, including the concept of zero, and incredible advances in astronomy from the Middle East. It was a true exchange. So if this network was so powerful, so transformative, why did it end? What happened? Why did the world's greatest highway just sort of fade away? Well, it wasn't one single thing. It was more like a perfect storm of events. First off, let's not forget how incredibly dangerous this journey was. We're talking brutal deserts, frozen mountain passes, and a constant, very real threat from bandits and thieves. On top of that, you had regional wars that could shut down a route for years. It was always a high-risk, high-reward kind of deal. But the very thing that made the Silk Road so powerful, its connectivity, also became its greatest weakness. It didn't just carry silk, it also carried something absolutely deadly. In the 14th century, this network became the main highway for one of the worst pandemics in human history, the Black Death, which traveled from Asia straight into the heart of Europe, killing tens of millions. So, if you boil it all down, the decline really comes down to three big things. One, the rise of maritime trade. Suddenly, sailing was faster, safer, and you could carry way more stuff on a boat than on a camel. Two, the collapse of empires, especially the Mongol Empire, which meant that political stability disappeared and the routes became dangerous again. And three, European explorers eventually found their own direct sea routes to Asia, completely bypassing the old overland paths. But just because the caravans stopped, that doesn't mean the story ends there. The influence of the Silk Road didn't just vanish. It echoes through time right into our modern, globalized world in ways you can still see and feel today. When you get right down to it, the whole idea of a global economy, of interconnected supply chains, of cultural exchange on a massive scale, that was born on these ancient routes. The Silk Road basically wrote the first draft for the world we live in today. And I mean, think about the specific impacts. Chinese papermaking arrives in Europe and helps fuel the Renaissance. The number system we all use every day, that came from India, spread by Arab scholars along these routes, and completely transformed Western science and math. The world was fundamentally and permanently rewired. And that brings us to our final section, where we're going to see how this ancient idea is being brought back to life on a truly epic scale. Because what if the Silk Road wasn't just a thing of the past? What if it's also a blueprint for the future? Just take a look at this. China's Modern Belt and Road Initiative is essentially a new Silk Road for the 21st century. But instead of caravans and camels, we're talking about a massive network of high-speed railways, pipelines, ports, and data cables. And it's not just connecting a few empires. It's designed to link over 150 countries across Asia, Europe, and Africa. The cargo's different: goods, energy, data. But the core idea is exactly the same. Connection creates prosperity. And that really leaves us with a huge, fascinating question. The ancient world was connected by a thirst for silk and spices. Our world today is connected by infrastructure and data. So looking ahead, what's next? What will be the Silk Road of the next century? What will be the next great network that brings humanity closer together and, once again, completely redefines our world?